Oh, yeah, thank you. So thank you so much. Can folks see my presentation now? You should see my slide just with my intro. Okay, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk to you folks about wetlands. There we go. So I wanted to just kind of give you this little overview about how I've kind of organized my talk. I'm just going to talk a little bit at the start about why wetlands matter. I think probably many of you know this already, but I think it's always good to remind ourselves of that, because we also want to be reminding our local decision makers of these things. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy for wetlands under threat. Unfortunately, we often start thinking about protecting a wetland when it's under threat. And so then we have to go into the defense mode like folks are doing now for the Schomburg wetland. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and talk about the agencies that you interact with at that stage of the game. But then I'm going to spend most of my talk talking about planning ahead for wetland protection. How can we be proactive to put protections in place for wetlands that we care about? And a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this section also is information that you can make use of when you're in the defensive mode. So that's the three things the sections of my talk. And as I put in the chat, I thought, well, I don't want to give you a lot of links in this presentation, but a lot of times you need links. So what I did ahead of time is put together this resource sheet. The link is in the chat, and that's something that later you can go back to and make use of. And tonight, as if people ask questions and you think of things like, oh gosh, we need to put that in that resource sheet, I'll try and keep track, and if you keep track too, I can add things to it. So, okay, jumping in, why do wetlands matter? Wetlands matter because they provide habitat, because they help protect water quality, and because they are great storage areas for floodwater. So those, I think, are the three main points that you want to make with decision makers. On the habitat issue, we've got a picture here of a wetland bird out in a wetland, but I've also provided a link in the resource guide to this document that's focused on the Chicago region, development of a natural area integrity and restorability index to lands of the Chicago region. I have a link to that document in my resource guide and give you the page number where they list the species in our region of greatest need of conservation that are wetland dependent. So to me, that's one of the important things for you to have when you're advocating for habitat. And then secondly, water quality. We know wetlands occur in areas where land is pretty flat and the water spreads out over the land. That means that the water flow is slowed down in wetlands. And so that's an opportunity for sediment, contaminants to drop out of the water, to settle in the wetland. Wetland plants and wetland microbes also play a role in breaking down contaminants, so that waters that come out of a wetland and flow into rivers and streams and lakes are usually cleaner than what comes into the wetlands. So wetlands play that very important role of cleansing the water before it moves downstream. And then again, because you've got this area where a wetland water stays in that area quite a long time. It's depressional or it's a low lying area. Wetlands are providing flood storage. So when it rains, if you haven't destroyed all your wetlands, those are places where water is held, and that helps a lot with reducing flooding downstream. So just want to say here that, when you're talking to local decision makers, I think they're going to care about habitat, but they're definitely going to care about water quality, and they're most certainly going to care about flood water storage. So now moving to what do you do when you have a wetland that's under threat? So that's the point at which you probably need to be engaging with the government entities whose role it is to protect wetlands, to minimize the destruction of wetlands, and hopefully, we've already lost so many wetlands in Illinois. We really need all the wetlands that remain. So this gets a little complicated, and I'm not going to go into all the complexity. You probably have heard about arguments at the national level on waters of the US, and we've talked a lot about, protecting wetlands and wetlands losing their protections at the federal level. So I'm just going to talk about kind of where the situation where we are today. So under the Clean Water Act, there are federal protections for wetlands, and I would call those wetlands that are connected to other bodies of water. So side stream wetlands on a river are protected. Anything that connects to other flowing water is generally falls under the Clean Water Act. And it is the Army Corps' role then to evaluate any proposal to fill a wetland or dredge a wetland. And the permit that you have to receive from them to do that work is called a 404 permit. And so in our region, it's the Chicago District of the Corps that covers the whole area around Lake Michigan that's shown on the map in this slide. So all the permits in our area for wetland destruction of federally protected wetlands come from the Army Corps of Engineers. And I've given you the link to the Chicago District's Corps page in the resource guide. You want to be paying attention to public notices there. Federally protected wetlands, the state also plays a role. So if a 404 permit is required because somebody's going to do something to a wetland, then they also need to get a certification from the Illinois EPA, and that's called the 401 certification. And these numbers, 404, 401, they refer to the sections in the Clean Water Act. So if you, at the same time that an applicant is seeking a permit from the Army Corps, they also need to be seeking this certification from the Illinois EPA. And what the Illinois EPA has to certify is that whatever is proposed, work in the wetland is proposed, that it's not going to have a major impact on water quality downstream. So it's called a water quality certification. And again, I've given you the link in the resource guide to the page where those are public notice. So that's one way that wetlands are protected in our region. But if a wetland does not fall under federal jurisdiction, and in general, you hear these called isolated wetlands. I'm not sure that term is really appropriate, but I think it's just easier to make use of that term. we, at least in northeastern Illinois, the counties in this area have adopted countywide ordinances that provide protection for these wetlands that aren't covered federally. Now, if you go to other counties throughout the state of Illinois where they don't have this local protections, then if the feds say, wait, we're not responsible for this wetland, then the person who wants to just destroy it can just go ahead and destroy it. So we're lucky that we live in the part of the state where there are these local programs. Now, typically they are run by the county. I would say Lake, DuPage, McHenry, Kane all have probably pretty robust countywide stormwater ordinances that protect wetlands. Wills is probably the weakest of those programs. In Cook County, it's a little different. It's not the county that is responsible for the ordinance. The authority for Cook County was given to the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. So they are the ones, and I and many other water activists working in Cook County participated in the development of the Cook County Watershed Management Ordinance. So I've given you the link to their page that talks about the ordinance. In the case of both Cook County and all the other collar counties, the way these ordinances work, and they have different names, like Cook County's is called Watershed Management Ordinance. McHenry County, I think ours is called Stormwater Management Ordinance, but they all include some element that protects wetlands. The way they operate in each county is either the county or MWRD is responsible for seeing that the ordinance is implemented well. They are the ones that implement it in the unincorporated parts of the county. Local municipalities can be delegated to implement the ordinance in their communities. So they still have to follow all the rules of the ordinance, but they're the ones responsible for implementing it in their town. And MWRD or the county plays an oversight role. Like if a town wasn't implementing the ordinance in the way the requirements are set up, one could complain to the MWRD or the county, and they would have to check that out. And they have kind of a regular program to evaluate how well are these delegated municipalities adhering to the requirements of the ordinance. And I wanted to note here that on the Cook County Watershed Management Ordinance page, if you kind of scroll down through all the kind of intro information on that page, that's also where MWRD posts requests for projects that want a variance from the requirements of the ordinance. And the Schaumburg is on the top of the list requesting a variance. So that's something to pay attention to specifically on this, going forward on this Schaumburg wetlands project. So, my understanding now is the core, the Schaumburg wetland, it has fallen under the jurisdiction of the Cook County Watershed Management Ordinance, and both MWRD and the village of Schaumburg are playing a role in how that's going to be implemented. And so that's the place where you need to be advocating for this wetland that's under threat. Any questions about that? I feel like this is one of the most complicated pieces of all this.
Okay. Yeah, I guess we've got one from Barbara. Did you, I'll go ahead and ask it for her. Does MWRD know when someone has applied to a municipality for a variance?
Yeah, this is the one, I mean, suppose the municipality has this delegated power. And so then somebody has to go ask them instead of MWRD. Does MWRD still know about it and post it?
Yes, and maybe, and this is my understanding because I see that MWRD has the Schaumburg variance posted. So I think that is my understanding, but maybe I will clarify that. If in all instances, a variance has to go to MWRD.
And I guess another question, Cindy, that's related is how do we know which municipalities are in charge of themselves of enforcing the ordinance within their borders?
That's a good question too. And let me see if we can find a list there. I would say in general, I would assume probably for you guys in Cook County that most of the communities have taken that responsibility. It tends to be really small communities that defer and say, oh, like, I'm thinking of here, like in McHenry County, I think like a little town like Greenwood that, has maybe 100 people. They say, oh, well, we don't have the staff to handle this. The county will just handle it for us. But by default, I would assume that the municipality in your area has elected to take responsibility. But I'll look and see, I'll check on where we can find a list. I think it's probably, I would think there would be a list at the MWRD website, but we just have to dig in and find it. Good questions. So then this slide is just, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just saying, thank you, Barbara, and continue, please.
Yeah, so this is just a little, this is just then just a little overview of what I'm going to talk about now. I'm just going to talk about all these different programs, planning tools that I think are good ways to proactively work towards wetland protection. And in saying that, I think these are also great lists and things for you to be aware of when you're to be thinking about when you're advocating for a wetland that you're trying to defend. And so mainly I'm going to talk about, kind of lists of endangered species, green infrastructure, center those things. But then I'm going to talk a little bit about funding opportunities. If you're doing outreach to local decision makers and trying to get them to be more proactive to protect wetlands in their area or set up tools to protect wetlands in their area. And then last, then I'm going to just touch a little bit on private landowner outreach, because if you have a wetland you care about and somebody owns it, it's been sitting a long while, nothing happened on it, might make sense to reach out to them and to let them know what they have and encourage them to think about protecting their wetland proactively. So kind of jumping on, I wanted to talk about the Illinois Natural Area Inventory sites. And this is like, I haven't been able to find a good map of the natural area inventory sites. I pulled this out of a document. That document I referenced earlier that has the list of species of greatest need of conservation that are wetland dependent. So this is a map out of there. You can see the INAI, Illinois Natural Area Inventory sites, are shown in pink. So periodically, Illinois DNR surveys the states and they identify the sites that are really the best sites for habitat in our state. So you've got them in in the Northwest Cook territory. The other thing I just want you to note on this map is they talk about these gray areas, and you can see on the map some where they've filled in gray areas that didn't necessarily fall into their criteria. They had cutoff criteria for size of grassland, size of wetlands, size of forests, but it also makes sense to when you've got a number of small parcels in an area to connect them and figure out some protection for the gray areas that connect those areas. And this is going to come up later when we talk about green infrastructure planning. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And oh, in your resource guide, whoops, went the wrong way. There we go. Sorry. In your resource guide, there also is a link to the list of Illinois natural area inventory sites by county. And that was last updated in December 2020. So again, thinking about the role that wetlands play in terms of habitat, then I think it's important to know who are the species that are making use of the wetlands in your area. And so what's going to resonate the most with the Army Corps and MWRD and others is, you know, do we have species there that we're very concerned about? So I think it's important to know about both the federally endangered, threatened, and candidate species. So those are species that are considered so rare that they're protected at the federal level. So I gave you the link to that. Then the Illinois Endangered Species Protection Board has a list of species that are considered threatened and endangered in Illinois. That also is organized by county. And then we talked already about this wetland species of greatest need of conservation. We have a list for the Chicago region. And I have pictures here of two birds, but you know, this doesn't, these lists of species aren't just birds. They're amphibians, mammals, reptiles, plants, insects. So birders and botanists and other biologists are all, you know, your good friends in helping to be able to point out that a given wetland is providing habitat for these rare species. Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about is aided wetlands. And aided stands for advanced identification. So AD, the ID from advance, ID from identification. So you may hear this term aided wetlands. This is a project that US EPA office in Chicago undertook, and they developed these aided wetland maps for DuPage, Kane, Lake, McHenry counties. So I'm giving you the link to their page. Unfortunately, it wasn't done for Cook County. I don't know why that didn't happen. Maybe because the county's so big, you know, it was the more developed when they started working on this. But definitely, if there's anybody on this webinar who's from one of those surrounding counties, take a look at these aided wetland maps for your county. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about how these were developed. this actually, the map I pulled here is kind of close to where I live in McHenry County. You can see that in green, they call those aided high habitat value. That means that they'd identified these wetlands as having, high value for providing habitats for rare animals and plants. Then they also, you'll see some areas where here they're kind of in beige. Those are called aided high functional value. And those are ones where probably the wetlands were not as high quality. They were kind of degraded. Maybe they're cattail marshes, have invasive species in them, but they still serve a role in terms of water quality and especially flood storage. So I think thinking about the fact that we really value wetlands that have a high habitat value, we value wetlands for their functional value, even in Cook County where you don't have an aided wetland layer, you can still use those terms to argue why a wetland shouldn't be destroyed for its habitat value. If you can identify species, the birds and bugs and reptiles that are making use of it, but it also, if you know that it's, storing water, you can be arguing for its protection because of its functional value. And like I said earlier, I think that flood storage really resonates with local municipal governments. So, oops, there we go. Sorry, it's very sensitive to moving the slides around. So now I want to switch and talk about green infrastructure planning. And so this is an initiative that Chicago Wilderness got started, where they put a number of years ago, put together this green infrastructure vision map for northeastern Illinois. And they did exactly what I was talking about earlier on those gray areas. They said, well, where do we have big tracts of land? It could be forest preserved sites, it could be oak woodlands, and let's connect those things. And you can see on this map, a lot of the connections go along stream courses. This green infrastructure vision map at the regional level picks up streamside wetlands. So thinking about the green infrastructure in your community is a way to really put a tool in place to further proactively protect wetlands in your area. And so in your resource guide, I gave you a link to the this green infrastructure vision, some history on that. And then I also provided a link to some local examples of green infrastructure planning. And so what kind of came out of this big map is then green infrastructure plans have been developed at the county level, at the municipal level. And again, it's this opportunity to look at the resources on the ground and put on, develop a map that says these are important to us. These are important to us for our habitat. These are important to us for water quality, important to us for floodwater storage. Looking at these local level examples at the Chicago Wilderness site, the one that I could find closest to your area is this, that it's been done for Des Plaines River communities. So you can see, I think this is just a screenshot I took of one of the maps that's in that local level examples. As I said, this also can happen at the municipal level. And so on the left, I'm showing you a piece of the Woodstock green infrastructure map. And you can see again, the whole idea is you try and kind of connect and encompass natural features of your landscape that you want to maintain. So you can see this dark green are probably park sites that are already protected. This you probably can't see really well, but this is an oak woodland that they're protecting. If you see the kind of dappling here, there's a big wetland they're protecting here, wetland here. So this is what green infrastructure planning at the municipal level can do. You can develop this kind of overlay that then you can overlay on your zoning map. And so I have the Schaumburg zoning map up here on the right as an example. If Schaumburg had some kind of green infrastructure planning, then we would see probably something that connected these big local forest preserve district sites to smaller important areas within the municipal boundaries. And then these green infrastructure efforts then typically go beyond just this mapping at the municipal level, but they give recommendations for how to be better utilizing nature to help with water cleansing and flood storage down to the neighborhood level. So that's something to think about if you're thinking proactively of how to protect wetlands in your area that right now are not protected by forest preserves or park districts. So how could one potentially fund these type of things? The Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning has these local technical assistance program. They fund work on comprehensive and corridor plans. So I think while Chicago Wilderness in the past has tended to fund these green infrastructure plans, I would certainly reach out to CMAP if there was interest in trying to get Schaumburg or other municipalities in your territory to develop these types of plans. Then, wetlands store floodwaters. They certainly contribute to climate resiliency as we are seeing more and more intensive rains. So this bipartisan bill that got passed at the end of last year, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, I haven't dug totally into it, but people are telling me, there is definitely money there for communities to request and make use of on the local level. And so, that's where a town could say, well, this wetland's so important to us, we're going to buy it. We need this wetland to reduce flooding downstream. So definitely think that's an opportunity. And then lastly, I think we all fall into this trap of, we see a wetland out there on the landscape and nothing's happening to it. We recognize the value it has, but we aren't thinking ahead of that. If it's not protected in one of these ways, that it's, somebody can come in and say, hey, I want to fill this wetland and, put my trucks there. So all the talking points that you can use with the Army Corps in making comments to them, and that you can use when reaching out to your local municipalities if they've got a proposal for wetland destruction, all those talking points about why this wetland is important. You can do the same with a private landowner. work with land trust, and if there's a wetland that's really important in your area, a land trust could work with you to put an easement on the property. It doesn't preclude a landowner from developing parts of the property that aren't wet. Typically, these conservation easements just lay out what can be done on the land by the current landowner and by any landowner in the future. And so important wetlands could be protected with a conservation easement, and and then a footprint of the area of the site that it would be okay to develop could be included in that conservation easement. And of course, when people put conservation easements on their land, typically the value of the land is lessened, and so there is an opportunity for tax breaks for individuals or companies that have put a conservation easement on their land. And then always, you can always be advocating with your local park districts, forest preserve districts, for their help in a purchase of a wetland that's important in your community. And those were my thoughts. And so I'd be happy to take my slides down, and we just want to do some questions, or are there slides that you want me to go back to before I take them down?
Thank you very much, Cindy. Yeah, there's a couple of questions here in the chat. Donna asks, she prefaces her question, we plan to work with McHenry County Land Conservancy to restore a wetland in Bull Valley. The mayor is excited to see this happen. Do we need to get a permit for restoration?
That depends. It depends on what you're doing as part of your restoration. I would say that if you're just, taking out invasive plants and planting wetland plants, that you don't need a permit. If you are engaging in any activities that would involve dredging in the wetland, like if there were farm tiles that you were taking out, you might want to check and see whether you needed a permit for that. And then obviously if you were doing any filling in the wetland, that can also require a permit. So I would, for someone in McHenry County, I would talk to folks at McHenry County Stormwater Management, and they will easily let you know if it falls under their jurisdiction or they think it falls under the core jurisdiction. They would be very helpful with that. And you could maybe do exactly what you're planning to do, but you might need a permit for it, or they might say, nope, that works fine. You don't need a permit.
Cindy, I think it would make sense for you to stop screen sharing now.
Thank you, Barbara. So to preface my question, when I met with some of the residents that are in the, basically right next to the wetland in Schaumburg, one of them owns part of the pond. That is, the other part is part of the property that's in dispute, and he claims to have caught a Blanding's turtle. So I contacted a childhood friend of mine, is a doctor of herpetology. He's more of a salamander guy, but he did give me some information on Blanding's turtles, and which I have on my phone here, and I put up on our Google Drive in a PDF form. It's very helpful. Kind of discouraging though, because the best time to look for turtles is not now. So, but anyway, my question is, what sort of evidence does one need to claim that there potentially might be a threatened or endangered species in a wetland to possibly, throw a little monkey wrench into the works.
Well, obviously, if he had a picture, that would be great. But if he doesn't have a picture, I mean, if a Blanding's turtle is pretty distinctive in terms of what's on its underside. I'm not a turtle expert, but the little bit I know about Blanding's turtles, if he can say, well, I saw this. The other thing that I would do is I'd look at there's got to be Blanding's turtles in Cook County. So if you look at those lists I gave you, you probably would find Blanding's turtle there. I would talk to folks at the Forest Preserve District to see what
Right.
they know.
Barbara gave a suggestion of talking to Chris Anker. I don't know do you know Chris? So go ahead.
He's a
Barbara.
wildlife biologist with the Forest Preserve District, and his office is in Northwest Cook County. So,
That would be perfect. And I mean, you really don't have to have shown that there's a Blanding's turtle there. If somebody reputable could say, hey, this is likely habitat for Blanding's turtle, then they should not be moving forward on this project without having done a survey for Blanding's turtle during the season when you would be able to see Blanding's turtles. So, I think, and you guys can maybe tell me what, if any, surveys for flora and fauna have been done for the Schaumburg wetland. Have any? I mean, that's a question.
If they have, they haven't been very thorough. I'll tell you that right now. So.
Yeah. So I think that's totally reasonable to push on that. And I would have put this into the resource guide, but things have changed now and you have to always pay for this, but it might be worthwhile for you to do this. I will add this information to the resource guide. There is a tool that Illinois DNR has called Ecocat, and it's an online mapping tool where you get on and you draw a polygon around the area you're concerned about. And they will then generate a list of resources, endangered species that, because of their evidence of them being in surrounding areas, that there's a potential for them to be on this site. And
Can you say the name again?
Ecocat.
CAT, like meow?
Oh, here, I'll put it in here. ECO.
Yes, ma'am.
Ecocat. It can be a little tricky to use, but I would be willing to help walk somebody through it so we could generate a polygon that encompasses the Schaumburg wetlands and let you know what potential there is for threatened and endangered species to be in this area. Now, really, under Illinois law, they should have done an Ecocat consultation with IDNR on this project. So maybe your first step would be to FOIA the village of Schaumburg and ask them for the Ecocat consultation for this project.
Definitely that.
There also may be, I haven't looked at this, I've been retired for a year or so now, so I haven't looked at this, but there also may still be a list, a way to get on the IDNR site and see if an Ecocat consultation has been done for this site, and then you could get your hands on it.
It's
So,
all good stuff.
yeah, I can pull this info together for you.
Oh, I appreciate that, Cindy. Thank you.
Well, so Cindy, if there is an endangered or threatened species, I mean, let's say Blanding's turtle or whatever the heck it might be, what kind of a difference is that going to make? My understanding is that the Illinois protections for endangered and threatened species are not all that great.
Unfortunately, yes. My understanding of this is if IDNR determines that, yes, this is a likely place where there's a Blanding's turtle, then the develop and say everything else went through, you don't win, they're going to destroy the wetlands. They would have to get an incidental take permit from IDNR. Basically, that says we might accidentally destroy this endangered species, and we get a permit to do it. But that's another place where you can weigh in. And so, it's another impediment to them moving forward with this project.
What was that called again? What you just said?
Incidental take permit. I'll type it in the chat.
By the way, I'm saving this chat if anyone, would like it. Now, what if that is combined with, say, there might be a great horned owl, that is there too, that one of the residents take. Now, I realize that's not endangered, but it is owl habitat. Now, if you combine that with a possible Blanding's turtle, what about the cumulative effect?
Exactly. I mean, I think that those are the arguments you can make. And actually, when you comment on an Army Corps 404 permit, that's one of the things they tell you to talk about is the cumulative impacts. And so obviously the rarer the species, the bigger it hit it is, but you're right, a great horned owl, it's, you could be arguing it's providing habitat for that. And, and with your discussions with the village of Schaumburg, you're trying to get at the hearts and minds of the decision makers there. And I think, any wildlife that is still there in the community is something they need to be paying attention to, right? And you as citizens are the ones to tell them this habitat is important to animals and other wildlife, and it is important to us as citizens. And we don't want you to just be, saying, okay, these wetlands don't mean anything to us and we can destroy them.
So Cindy, I have another sort of general question. I mean, I'm sure that you have encountered probably many, many times a situation where somebody proposes filling in a wetland because they want to build a trucking facility on it or whatever. And they say, and we are going to, replace its function with stormwater storage someplace or another else, or there's plenty of stormwater sewage in this nearby creek, or, whatever. I remember Gene Seller, who used to work for the Army Corps in Chicago, saying that wetland mitigation, that you never actually manage to recreate everything that got lost. You know, I mean, it's just a myth that you can relocate the habitat and the functions to someplace or another else. But still, you know, people say all the time, oh, we'll just, you know, we'll take care of that through this alternate, we'll build some detention ponds on the property, we'll, whatever the heck it is. And what, I mean, what do you say in response to this argument about, you know, oh, it'll be just as good after we're done, even though the wetland isn't there anymore?
Yeah, I think that's where the Army Corps criteria can really help you. And I would need to dig into the Cook County SMO, but I'm pretty sure it reflects the Army Corps hierarchy, where first you want to avoid impacts to wetlands. Second, you want to minimize. Only third do you mitigate. And so I think you can be, that's an argument you can, you know, you can be making is, you know, why can't they minimize? Why do they need to destroy this whole wetland? You know, can they minimize it? Can they first avoid it? You know, yeah. So I think, you know, those are already laid out, and maybe I'll try and avoid, minimize, mitigate. I'll try and find the language from the core and within the WMO. So yeah, they're always going to be, you know, there's always folks that are going to be pushing for do the least, right? And you know, do the least to follow the values that have been set in the Clean Water Act, and then also in these county-wide stormwater ordinances that are designed to minimize wetland destruction. And so you just have to be speaking their language back to the regulators and saying, look, you know, your own language says, let's avoid this, let's minimize this. And, you know, we don't jump to, oh, well, we'll just destroy it and then we can mitigate it. Because you're right, you know, especially wetlands with high habitat value, we're not good at recreating those.
Seems like they could have picked somewhere else too, you know, it's just like this whole thing out in Rockford, you know, I mean, different story, but you know, with the remnant prairie out there, you know, it's just, it seems senseless, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I know.
And that's why I thought, in thinking about discussing this with you all tonight, that's why I thought, well, I'm going to talk a bit about, you know, these kind of planning tools that help you identify ahead of time and at least put down on paper the things you want to save. You know, I think that's important. So yeah, I mean, yeah, and it reflects the values of your community, right? You know, the green infrastructure vision for the Chicago wilderness region reflects our value as a region that, you know, we want a wilderness within the city, you know, within this metropolitan area, that we value, you know, we value these natural features that remain in our area.
I mean, if Schaumburg had green infrastructure with this particular wetland in place, we wouldn't be worried right now. It would be already taken care of because of the preparation.
Yeah, I mean, it would be another tool. I mean, I don't want to say that, you know, still, if you had an overlay that said, you know, if Schaumburg had a green infrastructure plan and they had an overlay that encompassed this wetland, still the property owner could be requesting to fill those wetlands and et cetera, but it's another piece of another layer of defense against anybody
I'll-
saying yes to that. Yeah.
I like the word you used, impediment. Yeah, impedes them, you know, and the more work they have to do, the more discouraged they're going to do, because the more money they're going to have to spend too, you know, possibly, potentially at least too. So,
Yeah, and so strategically it's an impediment, but it really is because we as, you know, a nation and a county value these wetlands. We've said, you know, this can't be easy for you to destroy this wetland. You got to jump through all these hoops. You know, you got to pay attention to the value of this resource. So,
right.
because we care about it and it's important to, you know, to our communities.
Well, thank you very much, Cindy. I mean, this is very enlightening and very helpful. It's like practical right now. We need it, you know, so really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, and you guys,
Are there,
yeah, keep me in the loop. You know, if there's any questions, I'll try and investigate this variance question that Barb had, and really clarify what the role of MWRD is going to be. But I think you also should just always keep in mind that it's really, they are the ones who are the regulator here. So if things aren't happening in Schaumburg the way you think that you don't think they're complying with the ordinance, then they're, you know, MWRD should be made aware of that.
yeah, there was a suggestion of, I was talking with Carolyn, actually petitioning the MWRD. And I'm actually really not sure how to do that. Maybe you could shed a little bit of light on that.
Well, this variance that they have posted, and, you know, it's like, I think it, you know, there's no date or anything. It seems to me that there's got to be some opportunity for public comment there. So that might be, I can probably help you try and figure out who you can talk to have them clarify what that means for you. Unless
the only-
somebody's already done that.
Go ahead, Paul.
Jim, have you contacted Ada Sepulveda's staff about this? I was checking on the newsletter. There's no mention of this issue, but she's the local MWRD commissioner from Hanover Park, just west of the.
Oh, yeah, I know. And we had Yusuf at one of our meetings there earlier in the summer, her assistant. I was actually planning on contacting them tomorrow for the meeting I'm going to get to, you know, together with everybody on Sunday. So and maybe I could use your input too, Paul, because I know you worked on
MWRD
campaign, yeah,
Mhm.
or didn't work on the campaign, but you know,
we ended up
our-
endorsing her in the general. Yes.
exactly.
So I think that's a great suggestion to make use of her and her staff to, you know, answer your questions about what the process is.
Yes, and if
Well, I definitely have a lot more insight for that now after your presentation. I'm sorry, was there someone else?
Barbara.
It was me. I didn't want to interrupt you, Jim. Yeah, I mean, if I recall correctly, it was the better part of a year ago that Yusuf came to one of our XCOM meetings, and he promised that he was going to get back to us to explain what the situation was with MWRD and the exterior wetland and whatnot. But that, I mean, it was like March or April, and I don't think he's gotten back to us yet, if I recall correctly.
You know, that there were a couple of emails exchanges, and I don't think it was as early as I thought. It was more like June, but
maybe it was.
I could, yeah. But you're right. You know, it's been a while, so it's time to get back in touch with him. You know, for sure.
Yeah, but so Cindy, the public input about the request for the variance, If Schaumburg is, I mean, if Schaumburg is the one who's enforcing this thing, then it's Schaumburg that will need to have the, host the public comment, whatever, right? Or will it be MWRD? I would think that it would be Schaumburg, and who knows if they've done it already or not. I don't.
Yeah, it doesn't look
I
to
don't
me
think so.
like they have from what I'm seeing at the MWRD page. But yeah, I think that
Ah.
needs to be clarified. And I think, as Paul suggests, you can work through the commissioner, but I could also help you identify the staff at MWRD who are responsible for the ordinance implementation and, I think both tracks would be useful, be talking to your commissioner, but also then reaching out to staff, because you might get an answer more quickly there, because the commissioners probably don't know the answer. They'll have to go to staff. They might be able to do it more quickly than you, or alternatively, it may turn out that you reaching out to staff, you get an answer too. So I would do both.
The only thing that I know as far as like a public thing that is, it's still to be determined, is the ZBA hearing, the zoning board of appeals hearing. And, there's a couple of things that have to happen. Basically, I think they're called the PRG has to finish their review. And then there will be the opportunity of the public hearing, which was one of the motivations for getting this residential coalition together, is to kind of prepare for that. But then after talking to Carolyn Wooten, there was a whole bunch of other things. And then of course, now you've shed light on even more things. And so, as far as being prepared for a whole bunch of opportunities for the public to respond to this issue too.
Is there this PRG review, is that internal, or is there an opportunity for you to be weighing in with some of the, about the Blandings turtle, about the great horned owl? Is that, I feel like the more
I had never considered that. I just assumed that it was, it says Experior continues to work with the village's plan review group, PRG, and recently submitted revised plans. So Experior revised the plans too. So did the local residents get those planned revisions? They did tell me that they, and Jenny's on the call right now, and she's one of the residents, that they got a whole bunch of stuff, of packages of materials, but they had to request it, especially from the Army Corps of Engineers. It wasn't just like, mailed out to them, they had to like,
Yeah, but that was like last Christmas that we got those materials. We haven't gotten anything since, and we actually got an extension from the Army Corps of Engineers on their response period because the Experior people did not properly send out the plans to residents. So they have not been forthcoming at all with information.
Yeah, well, I mean, at this point, Army Corps is basically out of the picture because they've issued this determination that they do not have jurisdiction, right?
Right.
And so it's
Yeah.
really
it goes
all village and MWRD and possibly IDNR can get pulled in.
Basically what Cindy was talking about, the watershed management ordinance, because of that, it falls under that jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So to answer your question about the PRG, it really doesn't say. I mean, the other update from August 30th says the village received plans from Experior, which will now be reviewed by staff at PRG. PRG consists of professional staff from various departments and provides advice and recommendations on technical matters, as well as evaluates conformity with adopted village plans and policies. Once the submitted plans are vetted and approved by staff, they will be scheduled for a public hearing before the Zoning Board of Appeals. MWRD IEPA applications are also anticipated after review by Phil. Doesn't say that the community can get involved with it, but why not? Why wouldn't they?
You can, it would certainly be worthwhile to reach out to the planning staff at the village and ask, I mean, you can always FOIA anything you could, but I would call them and say, you know, I want to FOIA the materials that you've received from the company. You know, sometimes they can do weird things and say, oh, well, this is still draft. We don't have to release it, but you might as well ask and get whatever they will give you, especially if the plans have been updated, so you can be looking at it and evaluating it and, you know, see what the latest is. So I would call somebody at the village, ask about it, and just say, usually they will say, well, yeah, you can have it, but you need to send me a Freedom of Information request. And that's no big deal. Nowadays, everybody just tells you to do it. You don't need to feel like that is you being tough or anything. It's your right. You should just ask.
I could probably talk to that page where I'm getting this information from. I've talked to that guy twice now. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
could probably just call him.
Yeah, I mean, just say what, you know, we are trying to stay on top of things. We, you know, how do I get my hands on the latest materials, and can I, you know, and he'll probably say you have to write up a FOIA, and then you write it as broad as you can. You ask for everything in every way you can, so you can get, so they don't leave anything out.
Ah. All right.
You know, I mean,
Well, I got to get some water.
I mean, Cindy, I would guess that it could be very useful. I mean, if you know that there's some village staff or another, like in the planning department or someplace, who is looking at this thing and trying to, and has not yet, you know, I mean, they're in some kind of review and approval process. I would think that it would be worth trying to go talk to them about concerns. I mean, just, you know, just raise, hey, we think there might be blandings turtles there. Hey, this is a beautiful wetland. We would really hate to see it. I mean, just so that a little bit of direct human interaction with the people who are going to be making a recommendation to, I mean, the sooner you can get in and the lower a level you can, well, you kind of want to get in at all of the levels, but if you could, you know, if you could start working at the back end, you know, I mean, if you could,
Yeah.
if you could get things so that PRG said, we think this is a really bad idea, that would be tremendous victory.
Exactly. And if you don't do that, then all their discussions are going on with the people who want to destroy the wetland, and, you know, they're being influenced by what they're saying. So they definitely, the more they can hear from community members that, you know, what you're about, your concerns, where you can be saying to them, look, you know, what are you doing? These, you know, the ordinance says we need to be avoiding impacts to wetlands as the priority. Yeah, I agree totally that, you know, remember, it all comes down to personal interactions on a lot of these things. And especially, I think, at with local decision makers.